What's going on, guys? So today I'm sitting down with Geoffrey Verity Schofield. For the longest time, actually, that I've known you, I thought it was Schoenfeld. I just kept reading it as Schoenfeld, and it wasn't until like a couple months ago that I was like, "Oh, it's Schofield," and that blew my mind for some reason. But anyways, here you are, man. So first off, thanks for jumping on. Really excited to have you here. And for those who maybe don't know who you are and what you've been doing in the industry, can you give a little bit of an overview?
Yeah, sure. So thanks for having me on the show. Yeah, it's Schofield. It's not Schoenfeld. Schoenfeld is I'm not quite that prolific prolific yet. And I'm not really well. I sort of am science based. So I guess to back up, I'm a YouTuber and an online coach, and I also write on Quora. And so I'm on a bunch of different platforms, Instagram. Just a generic content creator. Nothing amazing. Nothing, not a world record setting anything, just sort of enjoy lifting and like making content and like helping people. So been at this like 2 to 3 years, so I'm sort of still kind of new to it, I guess.
Crazy. I actually thought you would have been at it for quite a bit longer, um, just by like your following, I guess, on like Quora and YouTube and things like that. So it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, so it's grown pretty, I guess, consistently and steadily. And I sometimes get people asking me like to make a video like tips for content creators, and I just feel like I'm way too new way too new to this to make that video. Or like I'll get coaches asking me like to make a video for coaches, like tips for online coaches. I just feel like I'm still learning about how things go myself. So yeah, I've only been at it like about 2 years on YouTube roughly, and then almost 3 years on Quora. And I've only been lifting like 7 or 8 years. So I kind of got a late start. I only started when I was 25 years old. And so
Mhm.
sometimes I get questions from people who are like, I am 26 years old. Is it too late to start lifting? And I'm like, no, no, it's definitely not too late to start lifting. Like you don't have to start when you're 9 years old and selected by the government or something. No, like you can start at any time, and your progress should always be like pretty good. You'll get newbie gains no matter your age, pretty much.
That was always kind of a funny question, like whenever it cropped up, because like, I mean, there are certain things that I can remember about being a novice, and you're like, oh yeah, that's pretty normal. But I don't think I've ever even had the thought of, is it too late for me to start doing anything? It just
Yeah,
doesn't
no.
really make a whole lot of sense to me why you'd ask that. It's like, can I ride a
I,
bike? Am I too late? And you're like,
yeah,
okay.
no. Yeah, I think it's because people, they hear like, oh, the hormones is like the only thing, like, oh, your testosterone declines with age, like, oh my god, I'm getting TRT ads when I'm 33 years old or something. And so they think they're
Yeah.
just they're washed up at in their early 30s or something, which is absolutely not the case. In fact, the research is very promising for older people gaining muscle. Like it's not really that much lower.
No, and to be honest, if you look at like all the world record holders, like in powerlifting, most of them are in their 30s. Lots are in their 40s, and you
Yeah.
do have actually a surprising number in their 50s. You have some in their 60s, but that's like masters world records and stuff like that. But but yeah, you can be jacked as hell and super strong, and that stuff doesn't really affect you until you're kind of like 55. And
Yeah,
even then, I'm not convinced that it affects you that much. Like, it's like,
for
okay,
sure.
you're not going to be gaining as much as fast, but that's assuming you've kind of already been training for like 20 years real hard and real well. So, but yeah, there's definitely a lot of nonsense out there. Recently, I've been seeing a ton of shit on turkesterone. Just like
Yeah,
the
yeah,
number of people that I see promoting that garbage, I'm just like, what the fuck? Like, it's like if you were to be like, hey, I've been taking this and it seems to work pretty well, then I'm like, oh, okay, cool, sure. But that's kind of as far as it can go. And I've literally been seeing so many people promoting it, being like, oh my God, I made these gains. And I'm like, oh, you mean just completely average gains that you would get off of any program? Yeah,
yeah,
what a shocker, you know?
yeah. No, it's pretty unreal how much. I mean, there's basically no scientific evidence for it. There's one study which, I mean, anytime you have one study, like it could just be statistical error anyway. Plus, that study was like absurdly underdosed. Jeff Nipper did a big video on that where it was like 16 times under what it said on the label, and they still made really good gains. And so you got to sort of wonder like why. And then they had the placebo group losing muscle while gaining strength and gaining weight, which is kind of hard to. So they gained weight, they gained strength, but they lost muscle. That's sort of a tough thing to wrap your head around. And I think it's overhyped, and you'll get the people who are selling it making these, personal claims that have really no evidence behind them and clearly very biased. And I would say it's just best to wait. In a few years, there's going to be a lot more research on it just because it's such a hot topic, but there's no FOMO when it comes to supplements. You don't have to be fearful of missing out on something. If you wait, it's probably very, very similar to creatine at best, where you get some water retention, and that's where the extra weight is coming from. These claims of like, oh, I put on, 4 pounds of muscle in a month. Well, yeah, you can do that if you take in a lot of salt for a day, right? You get water retention. Maybe it helps your pump, but is it actually going to be helping you gain muscle long term? Probably not. And even if it does, it seems to be very individual. And the people who seem to get the best gains are the ones who are following these creators. And, you see them always commenting on the page of these creators. And then they're like, oh, I got amazing results. Well, I've seen you basically follow this guy religiously for the past couple of years. And then you say you got great results, and now you're also selling it and there's a discount code. So I think it's best just to sort of chill and then wait, because you don't really miss anything by waiting for more information. And that information could very well just say, hey, it does pretty much nothing.
Yeah, I guess it's the funny thing to me about this one in particular is it's like creatine is pretty much the only thing you're going to get that's as close to a silver bullet. You know what I mean? And no one's going around being like, man, I started creatine and in a month I put on 4 pounds of muscle. Like no one says that. And that's something that has been so heavily researched and used like anecdotally for a really, really long time. And the funny thing about that too is like, I'm not dismissing anecdote, but there's anecdote is not just equivocal across the board. It's like, there's some people that I trust more than others. And when I see like 150 noobs who have like less than a year worth of experience at lifting, and they're like, oh my God, I put on like 10 pounds on my squat. And I'm like, you literally could have done that not going to the gym because you've never lifted. Like nothing about that is shocking. So it's like the stuff that I'm hearing, like if I start hearing like world record breakers being like, holy fuck, man, I took this, my recovery's great, I actually noticed I got leaner and this, then I'm like, oh, okay, cool. I'll definitely start paying attention. But the claims that I've heard recently, I'm just like thoroughly unimpressed, because either it's like something that you would just almost expect off of basic training, and or just a blatant lie. Like, I don't know if you saw, what's his name's, I can't remember the guy's name. He posted like a 30-day transformation for turkesterone or whatever.
Oh, Jesse like James West.
Maybe, yeah. Someone sent it to me, and I don't know who he is, but I remember seeing that and being like, yeah, bullshit. Like, one, you can very clearly tell that those photos were probably taken the same day. You know what I mean? Like, it would be really easy to do that. And so I don't know, I'm not holding my breath, but
I find it funny that a lot of the time they'll call out the transformations when they're, not selling the product that they're selling. So when it's in their best interest, they'll be like, oh, no, this is bullshit. Like, this is how you can manipulate a transformation through posture, lighting, angles, etc. And then, you can do a ton with posture, right? Like if you stick your belly out and have the bad lighting and the bad angle, you can look like 35% body fat. And then, you suck in the belly, get good lighting, put on a tan, flex, especially with a pump, with that good angle. You can look closer to 10%. right? So it's just, a lot of transformations, they are manipulated. I would say most transformations are manipulated, even from like reputable companies, because a lot of people, let's say there's a transformation challenge. These people want to win the challenge. And so
Yeah.
they take a shitty before picture and the best possible after picture. And everyone is doing this because everyone wants to win. And it might not be the fault of the creator, but it's not entirely honest either. I've posted a few transformations. I try to keep it as honest as possible. I don't even post them anymore just because some people are like, these results are not great. And I'm like, yeah, he lost 10 kilos, 22 pounds while gaining strength in a couple months. Like that's a good transformation, right? It just doesn't look that impressive.
Yeah, honestly, it's funny because when people say like, "Oh, I think I've got like 20 pounds to lose," I don't think they realize what 20 pounds actually looks like. Because
Yeah.
100%, I agree with what you're saying. Like, I've had tons of people who've lost 20 pounds, and they look slimmer, like
Yeah.
they look leaner for sure, but they don't look like jacked
Right.
lean. Like they don't look shredded. It's like that's just going to trim you down, but it's not going to do fuck all for your muscle. And even if you're training pretty well either, it's like it takes a long time to put on that kind of muscle to actually make you look jacked. So I definitely understand what you're saying. And those transformations that you see, like, yeah, they're a lot more than just I lost X amount of weight. It's like I lost this plus I had
Yeah.
like 9 months to put on X amount of muscle. Actually, 9 months isn't even that long, but like,
Yeah. No,
yeah,
takes years.
it's pretty interesting sometimes seeing that. You know who actually does a pretty good job of that is RP. I find they standardize
Yeah.
their photos pretty well for the most part. I have seen some ones that are a little bit iffy, but like you said, there's kind of an incentive there for people doing contests. But for the most part, I feel like they're fairly transparent and pretty accurate, like usually in like daylight and just kind of
Yeah.
same setting or whatever.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. They're
but
good.
yeah.
They're really good.
So when I guess we'll kind of get into it, but on a little bit of a tangent here, but um, when people are coming to the gym, first off, like when they're training for aesthetics, since I know that's more down your alley, what are some of the main issues that you see when people begin that journey, or kind of a couple months in, let's say?
Yeah. So I would say, there's a bunch of stuff. In general, hypertrophy training is a fairly forgiving goal, right? Like strength is quite specific, but hypertrophy, you can use a bunch of different exercises and get pretty similar progress, pretty similar gains, variety of rep ranges, variety of loading. Like you can go heavier, you can go moderate, you can go lighter. Your rest times are to a certain extent negotiable. Your frequency, your volume, all these things, they do have a significant amount of wiggle room. So you do see like, oh, you have Arnold who did a ton of volume. Then you have Mike Menzer who did one set to failure, high intensity training. And I even see natural guys who either do quite high volume. I'm sort of in that side of things. But then I've also seen good progress from high intensity training where it's one set to failure. And I do know natural guys who have gone down that road, and you can build a lot of muscle with a very, very high effort per set type of situation. So you would think that if hypertrophy is such a flexible goal and you can achieve it in so many different ways, that it should be really easy, right? And everyone should be hugely jacked. But that's not the case, right? Because people still manage to mess it up. So they have this huge variety in terms of like wiggle room of what they can do in the sets and the reps and all these other parameters, but people are still messing it up. And so I would say effort is a big one. And I don't like to say, hey, just train harder than last time, because that's not really a long-term sustainable thing, right? Like I actually did that for many years, but I ended up just putting in a lot of effort, but that effort wasn't really very efficiently put out, right? Like you see people who try very hard, but they don't actually seem to make all that great of progress. And other people, maybe they're not just straining and destroying themselves every single set, but they're making better progress. So I think, maybe that's not the most important thing, but it's certainly a factor. And I would say learn to use RPE, or reps in reserve. So rating of perceived exertion, or how many reps you have left in a set. You don't necessarily need to track it or count it unless you're a power lifter. And even then, I'm not sure if everyone uses it, but you have to know how close you are to failure, right? And if you're 8 reps away from failure, 10 reps away from failure, and studies have shown this where they said, okay, take your usual 10 rep working weight and just do as many reps as you can. And a lot of people were getting 18, 20, 20 plus reps. And so their typical set was like 8, 10 or more reps in reserve. And that just is not going to be efficient or effective for hypertrophy training. I think maybe for strength training, there's a time and a place for it, especially for like technique work, or if you're a little bit stronger, you don't want to get as beaten up. But for hypertrophy, yeah, training in fairly close proximity to failure, especially on the easier exercises, the isolations, the machines, etc., I would say that's a good idea. Consistency is a big one. So I'll get a lot of client intake forms and it's like, okay, 2014, I exercised. 2015, I did not. And then it's like, they're on this roller coaster, and you don't lose muscle quickly, but it's also time spent not gaining muscle. And then when you do resume training, you've lost the work capacity, you've lost the recovery capacity. And so you sort of have to play catch up. And, you can take a week off or 2 weeks off even a few times a year, and that shouldn't impact things too much. But if you're taking months and months off here and there every year, you're just going to be playing catch up, and you're sort of just wasting time. So I would say consistency is a big one that I see pretty often. If that's lacking, yeah, it's going to impact your progress. Technique is not the biggest thing, but certainly I see some people, they want to get big legs, and then they're squatting like part of the way down, and the hips, it's just going back, and you're not going to get big legs from quarter squatting. It's just not going to happen, right? Like your knees are going to, that's going to be the limiting factor for most people. And just directing the tension where you want to actually build, I think, is a big thing. And, there's a lot of things. Sometimes people train like powerlifters when they want hypertrophy, and that can work, but it's not going to be optimal. And I think you can try a power building approach, and that could work really, really well. But sort of assess your goals and what you actually want. And if you don't want strength and you do want hypertrophy, it doesn't really make sense to max out a lot, or, to do a bunch of sets of 2 and triples and stuff like that. And yeah, there's a bunch of stuff. It's mostly just focusing on the basics, no TikTok, Instagram-y BS where it's like, these Bosu ball bullshit exercises, and, just focusing on the basics, working hard, being consistent. And, those aren't necessarily marketable, which is why you don't see them all that often, but that is what is going to put on the vast majority of your muscle. Eating enough food is a big one. I see a lot of people main gaining at 140 pounds or something, and, they're worried about their abs, but they just need to really eat and be willing to put on a little bit of fat in order to put on a lot of muscle. Because if you're always under eating, it doesn't matter if you're doing everything else right, you just don't have the energy to actually build that muscle.
Yeah, there's quite a few things in there for sure that I've seen a lot. I've definitely seen a lot of like sort of ambivalence around training. So, I want to get really jacked. Then it's like, okay, well, you're always hitting like 1 RMs on your bench press and deadlifts, just like randomly. Yeah. And then you come in and you're beat up, and then you try and hit your, beat your old week, for volume, and you're beat up. And it's like, well, gee, I wonder why, but
that was me for a long time.
I think that was everyone, at one point. Like I used to be like a big advocate of high volume. I'd say over the last year and a bit, I've switched to much more of a focus on high intensity, very high effort, and lower volume. And I found actually that people can recover better, whether natural or enhanced. They tend to recover a little bit better. And there's also an adaptive period to that, obviously, and some individual differences. But I found quite a bit of success with that. But at any rate, like the whole maxing out thing, that's definitely been a huge thing. And then, gosh, what is it? Yeah, you said, I think you said something like training the muscle, that like the desired muscle, and you talked about squatting. That's a really common one too. Like people will be doing rows, but then they're like basically turning just a basic row into like a back extension or like an RDL if it's a barbell row. And it's like, I mean, you're moving the weight, but
Yeah.
this is not a sport where you move the weight. This is a sport where you be big and that's it. You know?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
And
Like,
yeah.
sorry, just the row thing, like the barbell row, you can do in so many different ways. And, if you're using a row with a lot of momentum, that might carry over to your deadlift. But in terms of like getting bigger lats or traps, probably not the way to go, right? Like you're better off using a machine or chest supported row or cables or something like that, just where you're actually targeting the muscles that you want to target. Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And I guess it's part of the learning curve too. And what was the other thing too? Yeah, eating. Like I honestly will be the first person to call bullshit on the whole hard gainer thing, or non-responder, I guess I should say.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
whenever I see research on non-responders, whenever I hear people saying, "Oh, I'm a non-responder," I'm like, "Oh, cool. Show me what you've been doing." And 99 times out of 100, it's like I train 3 times a week. I do way too little and I'm just not eating enough. And they always say like, "Man, I'm eating so much." And you know what? For sure, it might feel like you're eating a lot, but if you're not gaining weight, you're not eating enough. And it's as simple as that.
Yeah.
Subjective experience aside, that's not really a relevant like a point there. And the thing that you said about the research and estimated like reps in reserve is really interesting too, because like I use RPE and RIR with a lot of my athletes, whether it's strength or bodybuilding or whatever. And the first like month or two is usually just coaching them on how to apply enough effort to the exercise. Like I'll see them doing stuff and they're going, man. And then I'm like, cool, I want you to double the weight. And they're like, what? But I'm dying. And I'm like, yeah, double the weight. And then they do it. And then I'm like, okay, now I want you to add about like 6% more. And they're like, what? Oh my God, that was so hard. And I'm like, yeah, I know. Keep pushing. And by the end of it, like, so a great example actually is I've got an athlete of mine. She's stupid strong. So she's 50. Are you kilos or pounds over there?
Kilos, but I can
Okay.
think in either.
So she's a 56 kilo lifter. And in her next meet in April, she'll pull 190 kilos, like no
Yeah.
problem. Her she squats like 100 and she'll squat about 150 and bench about 85 or 90, right? And she's like, the size of my leg, right? And so she was doing Bulgarians with like, I think like 40-pound dumbbells or something like that, which for her is, you look at her and you're like, oh, that's quite good. And then I remember like one time she was like, yeah, I don't know if this exercise or whatever. And I was like, oh, let me see your assistance work. So then she sent me a video of her Bulgarians and I was like, jump up to 70. And she's like, no way. Jumps up to 70. And then the next week I told her to go to 80. So she goes to 80 and she smokes it. And it's like, she is someone who works extremely hard, right? But sometimes, you put all your effort in the main lift, at least for powerlifters. Sometimes you put your effort in the main lift and then accessories kind of are like, it's not as important, because it's not my sport, right? And I'm sure that happens a ton in bodybuilding too. So it's like, maybe you put a ton of effort in the top exercise, but maybe the other one's not as much. And then it's like, are you doing a bunch of junk volume or is it all really productive? And so yeah, I don't know. How did you learn how to, I guess, push to that actual threshold? Because like I see some of your training on your stories every now and then, and like when you're going, it looks like your fucking head's about to explode. Like you're legit going to like that failure rate. So
Yeah. I think this is sort of an interesting thing because often people don't actually talk about how to train harder, right? They say just do it, right? Like train harder, but they don't actually sort of give anyone any practical, meaningful, useful advice. I often try to break down a set into pieces. So it's sort of the Tom Platz mentality of 5 more reps, right? Like he's doing a set of 20 in the squat or more, and he just breaks it down into 5 more reps. And if you start with a weight and it's a heavy weight on your back, and it's your 10 or your 12 rep max, and you're thinking, oh, I have to do 20 reps with this or 30 reps with this. It seems like an insurmountable task. But you get started, you do 5 reps, it starts slowing down, you keep going, you get a grindy rep, you stop, you take a few breaths, you keep going, and you just break down that set into doubles, basically doubles. And then by the end, you're probably just breaking it down into singles, trying to hold everything together, focus on your technique. And by the end, you're not even breaking it into singles. You're breaking it into like phases of the lift. So time, your perception of time changes to where it's not slowing down or speeding up. It's just becoming more thinly sliced. So the last rep of a really hard set, it's not even one rep. You're breaking it down by, okay, here's the eccentric. Here are the positions that I want to hit. Okay, here's the bottom position. Now I'm coming up. I know where the sticking point is. I'm trying to drive through it. And you're just slicing that even more finely to try to get the most out of every single rep of that set. And, you know, you don't necessarily need to train to failure, especially on the big movements. And I think if you're strength focused, you know, there's a pretty strong case for not training to failure. But if you do choose to go to failure or train really, really, really hard, I think breaking it down in that way can be very, very useful. And then some people have said that it's genetic, like effort is genetic, you know, your discipline is genetic. I find this just to be a cop out, right? Like maybe there is a genetic aspect to it. There probably is. You see some people, it's just like from the first moment, they just know how to push themselves and other people don't. But I would say this is mostly learned, and you can have that mindset of pushing harder. Rep speed is another one. So if you finish your set and the last rep was the same speed as your first rep, yeah, you probably weren't that close to failure, right? Like there should be some slowing. There doesn't necessarily need to be technique breakdown, but there should be some slowing. And it is fairly predictable for most people in most exercises. Some people say that, oh, I just can't grind, right? Like my eighth rep is one speed and then I fail the next one. And there was no slowing. This might happen on some movements with a really sharp sticking point. So, you know, maybe it's a close grip bench press and either you blow through the sticking point or like you hit it and you can't get through it and you just fail the lift. There might be a fiber type component to this as well. Often though, I think this is sort of a cop out and someone never really learned how to grind. So they didn't actually learn how to hit that sticking point, you know where it is, and you just fight through it. And, you know, they might say, oh, I'm fast twitch. And so they just, I guess I'm fast twitch. Like I can't grind. And, you know, choose exercises that are grindable as well. So something like a spider curl where, you know, you're lying on a bench, chest down, face down, and you're curling up. So the hardest part is at the top. It's not like a normal curl where you're standing and the sticking point is somewhere in the middle. It's at the top. And this makes it very, very grindable because you either get to the top or you have to really fight to get it all the way up. And you can see, and you can say, okay, well, that was a good set, but you had like 3 or 4 more reps. And they're like, what, 3 or 4 more reps? Then yeah, it's almost like you said adding weight and you just tell them like, nah, you had a little more. And you look at their face and they just kind of look like kind of bored during the set sometimes. And you're like, yeah, well, you were kind of just going through the motions. And this is where knowing the client or knowing the person is super important because some people you kind of have to coax into the effort and just sort of be more gentle with them and say, okay, well, maybe you had a few more reps, right? Like, you know, not be an ass about it. But other people, you know, I'm working with this one guy, he's ex-military. And like, he just told me like, kick my ass, right? Like if you think I should do something and I'm not at that level of effort, just like tell me straight up, very directly. And so that's what I do because, you know, for him, that's what is optimal. For other people, if I took the same mentality, the same mindset, you know, they'd probably just give up or it would backfire. So you have to sort of coax them up to this level of effort pretty gradually. And, you know, maybe there is a genetic component, but, you know, there's a genetic component to everything. And so I don't think this is really actionable information anyway. So I don't think it's really worth focusing on too much.
Yeah, 100%. There's a lot of stuff that gets passed on to genetics. So there is a genetic component to that. Depending on the research or the, you know, whatever it is you're reading, I know some people will call it grit or even just talking about different like stress thresholds and things like that, or different levels of resiliency and tolerance to I guess like acute or environmental stressors. So I have seen some of that research, and there does seem to be some, but again, it's 100% like epigenetics. So it's like,
Yeah.
are you actually doing something to train and build this? And even though that is the case, actually, like even though there's a genetic influence, that's 100% a malleable thing. Like it's not this static line where it's like, oh, because it's this, it's genetically predetermined. It's like, no, you have that line. You can definitely push it up. You might not be able to push it up the same as maybe the next person, but you can absolutely get better and get better
Yeah.
by like substantial amounts as well. Yeah, I
Yeah.
definitely see that
100%.
too. And even when people say like, oh, I can't get big or I can't get strong, and it's like, I've literally never met a person that can't get substantially stronger and substantially bigger and more jacked and more lean with proper training and dedication. And it's like the whole dedication and behavior thing, that's a whole nother side of it, right? Like that's super tough. And it just depends on like, what kind of trade-offs you're willing to make, what kind of pace are you willing to kind of adopt in order to eventually get to the point where you could achieve certain things. And not everyone's willing to do that, and that's fine. But I've just I've been coaching for a long time, and I've definitely met people who have a much easier time developing strength and muscle and all that stuff than others, for sure. That's pretty varied, you know, but I've never met anyone who couldn't get substantially stronger. Like every single person I've coached has gotten
Yeah.
substantially stronger. Not world record holder, but like to the point where if you go into a gym, you're like, oh, wow, that's actually impressive, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, for
Um,
sure. And that's what people don't realize. Since so many people don't put in the effort and don't put in the work and aren't willing to learn, they're not willing to like actually devote themselves to this. You could have average genetics and be 95th percentile in terms of physique or in terms of strength or in terms of pretty much anything in life you devote yourself to. So if you want to be like a 95th percentile musician or something and you have just average music genetics or whatever, like you can do that, right? You might not be 99.9 percentile like a professional musician or bodybuilder or strongman or whatever, but because there's that situation where most people aren't even whole assing it, they're just half assing it. If you whole ass it, like you're gonna outpace a lot of people, even if they had better genetics, quote unquote genetics, than you did. Plus, genetics is such a generic term, and like I use it just because people generally understand what I'm talking about. But there's a lot of professional bodybuilders who don't have the best genetics, right? Like maybe they have a good response to the anabolics or like, but in terms of like their insertions and stuff or their frame, I mean, Phil Heath, narrow, right? Like he doesn't have broad shoulders by any means. And so you could say, hey, well, he has mediocre genetics in that regard, right? Like overall, yeah, absolutely, the gift. But you can find genetic flaws with Arnold. He had a pretty thick waist, and that's why he always turned to the side when he posed, just to sort of hide that flaw. And so I think people are always so obsessed with their flaws without realizing that it often doesn't really matter that much. Like if your abs are not perfectly symmetrical and you're on the beach and like you have abs and you have a decent amount of muscle, I mean, you're going to look, people don't really care, right? Like it's people analyze themselves and are always way more self-critical than other people are critical of them, for sure.
Yeah, and I think it's important to point out too that it's much easier to go from, the first percentile to the 90th percentile than it is to go from the 90th percentile to even the 91st. Like that top level, every bit is so goddamn hard to get. Like you look at Hussein Bolt and then you look at the next fastest guy and it's like, 1/100th of a second or 1/10 of a second or whatever the heck it is. Like it's not a lot, you know?
Yeah.
And so like if
1%.
I
Yeah.
were to run next to him and be like, oh man, I'm only like a second and a half behind you. And
Yeah.
it's like that sound. I mean, it's so it's a relative metric, right? Like, or it's a relative measurement. So it's like that might sound like it's not that much, but I mean, fucking
It's a
hell,
lot,
that's not even anywhere near like national standards to get where they are, right? So it's, I mean, I'm
yeah.
assuming anyways, but that's just kind of numbers pulled out of my ass. But
11
yeah,
seconds,
so
yeah, sounds about right.
sure,
Yeah.
yeah, but it's definitely interesting. And so in terms of like actually structuring your training, I know that's something a lot of people struggle with. So like, how do they determine their split? Obviously there's a ton of stuff that goes into it, but even just in terms of like, should I just kind of train everything equally when I'm first starting out? If I'm looking and I'm like, hey, you know what, I want bigger delts, like, am I supposed to prioritize those? How do I prioritize those? If I do that, is it going to pull away from the other stuff? And just kind of getting people started, I guess.
Yeah, so I would say the biggest determinant in terms of training split is just the days that you want to be in the gym. And usually, if someone is a beginner, even if they want to train 6 days a week, or even 7 days per week, often I don't necessarily write a 6 day a week plan. And I don't think I've ever written a 7 day per week plan, where they're in the gym 7 days a week every day, just because I do think you want a day off a week in most cases. And especially if they're a beginner, I'd much rather have a 3 or 4 day per week kind of thing where they're getting sufficient recovery, because that is a big thing for beginners because they are so sensitive to the training. First, they don't need that much training. And second, they can't do that much training, right? Because they don't have those sort of recovery mechanisms in place, especially if they don't have a sports background. They're just like a sedentary. They've been sedentary their whole life. I would say, yeah, 3 days a week, maybe four, either full body 3 times per week, or perhaps upper, lower, upper, lower. Those are both very, very solid. As you become more advanced, it's sort of, there's two things at play. First is that you're getting stronger. And especially if you get very strong, you might need more recovery in place for hard efforts, right? Like if you're deadlifting 800 or 900 pounds, odds are you're going to need more recovery time from that, right? It's just, so as you're advanced, like you might need to space those efforts out a little bit more and be more mindful about training to failure, etc. But then also, like, your recovery capacity does to a certain extent go up, and you can perhaps get away with more volume, and you probably need more in some cases to grow. So, and then if they want to bring up a certain area, if they're a beginner, I err on the side of just training everything fairly equally, because I've heard so many people who they didn't train legs their first year or two, 3 or 4 or 5, and then they regret it. And then they're like, okay, well, now I got to play catch up. And I know that's me with my calves. And it's been like 8 years. And I'm just like, I just don't care. But I know I will care in like a few years. And so I'm like, I have to force myself to do it because I know that I will care in the future, but I don't care now. So it's like investing. You don't really care now, but like, you should do it because it'll pay off in the future. Right. So, and so that's something I'm trying to sort of coax myself into doing. And that's a lot of beginners with leg training, squatting, sometimes deadlifting, etc. Like they want to just bench and curl. And I think Dan Green said something like that was his first year of training. And then an old timer at the gym introduced him to a back workout. And he's like, oh, I didn't even know you could train your back. So,
Oh yeah, I heard.
yeah. So I think I try to just emphasize the basic movements and training everything fairly equally. And then later you can see, okay, maybe there's a weak point or you want to bring up the arms. If someone had done starting strength, okay, maybe they have lagging arms, maybe their delts need work, etc. And it just depends on their training history and then their goals and then, how advanced they are pretty much.
Yeah. So one of the funny things too is like I don't really get it so much anymore because I think that probably most of the people who listen to podcasts and who follow me are like more intermediate or advanced, kind of somewhere in that range. But I used to have a lot of people reaching out to me and being like, hey, how can I, bring this up, or how can I bring this up? And I'd be like, I'd
Bring
look at
everything
them
up.
and I'd be like, dude, you need to bring everything up. Like you're 150 pounds and you're, 183 centimeters, like you're just small everywhere. Like you just need to put on muscle anywhere you can, you
Yeah.
know? And so I would always find it funny when I'd see people doing these like specialized exercises. Like I
Yeah.
saw, Phil Heath, or I saw Ronnie Coleman. He swears by this exercise. And I'm like, you're not Ronnie Coleman.
Yeah.
Like you just need to put on muscle. Once you're jacked, yeah, then you can start looking at that. But like being skinny does not mean you're shredded. you know like
Yeah.
it just means you're skinny. And so you got to focus on putting on a lot of muscle. And actually you said a couple things there too that were pretty important, like just even the technical development standpoint. Like as your technique gets better, you're gonna be able to have higher levels of force production, because your
Yep.
body's going to actually internally stabilize more effectively and sense, hey, this is safe. So it's going to allow kind of like that little governor on your force production to sort of like back off a little bit and allow you to push really hard. So the first
Yep.
couple months or whatever, like you could probably not even change anything and just push harder and harder and harder and lift heavier and heavier weights and get stronger and stronger without adding any volume and just improving your technique. And
Yep.
I've done that a lot with clients. Like I actually use quite a bit less exercise variation, especially for new people, just
Yep.
because
Just
they need to get good at it because they don't know how to move properly.
yeah.
And I actually also agree with you as well about the whole programming thing. Like I've had lots of people be like, yeah, I'm going to do 6 days a week. And I'm like, why don't we start with 5? I'm like, I know you've got a really high output, but like, I guarantee you when you train with me, you're going to learn a new level of effort. And
Yeah.
then they're like,
Yeah.
okay, let's see. And then a lot of the times 5 is enough. Sometimes you even need to dial it back to 4, but we're getting so much more done with less volume. We're doing less wear and tear on the body. That's not
Yeah.
as accurate a phrase, but it's sufficient, I guess. But it's like
Yeah.
you're doing less, higher output, getting more done. So yeah, definitely lines up, at least with my experience and kind of what I've seen as well. Um, so in terms of nutrition, I know people really struggle with that a lot. Like there's people who I've seen who go into the gym and train super hard, but they're just not getting bigger. And a lot of that stuff is just going to boil down to the diet. And there's a lot of things that people struggle with. Like I know I certainly hit a point when I was gaining where it was just like impossible for me to gain past like 220. It was just this psychological barrier. Not that I was like, oh, I can't get past it, but just the amount of food that I had to eat, I was like, holy fuck. Like
Exactly where
that
I
was
am.
that was tough. So I know what I did that worked really well, but like I wouldn't recommend dirty bulks to people, but I was just like,
Yeah.
fuck it, but yeah,
It's
so
funny you mentioned.
go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. It's funny you mentioned 220 because I'm like 216, 217, and I'm in the same boat, especially with working a lot. Like it's a lot of liquid calories. It's like, it's a lot of food that I might not have as a general recommendation to most people, but like that's just what is maybe not needed, but that's like what really, really helps. Like I'm not going to grow on chicken breast, broccoli, and rice. It's just I would be eating all fucking day and I just don't have the time to do that. Same with
Yeah,
like cooking a bunch of meals. Like, so I rather just order it and have it be more calorie dense. And then those same foods, I'll get the comments of like, oh, I thought you were in the fitness industry or something. Or like, if it's not like, chicken breast and broccoli, people are just, whoa, oh my God, like, how can you make gains off of non clean food? And they don't realize like a lot of professional athletes don't have a super clean diet, especially like when they're in season and traveling around and they're super active and they don't want to lose weight because it's muscle, right? Like they're already lean and they're in the NFL and they're a running back or something. And their diet is going to have to be fairly high calorie to hold on to that activity level and muscle. And therefore, and they don't have a ton of time to eat. And therefore, often it is quote unquote, dirty foods. And is this like the best for health? No, but like if you have a goal, you might have to prioritize other things, right? Like it just depends on what you want, really.
I also don't think it's that detrimental for health either. I mean, so long as you're not like if you're gaining like insane amounts of weight and you're getting really fat, then yeah, it's obviously not good for your health. But like if you're gaining and you're quite lean and you're staying quite lean through your bulk, like you're gaining a a very favorable proportion of lean versus fat mass, then
Yep.
I don't really see it being as that bad until you really start to get really, really big.
Yeah.
So I know for myself, like I eat very, very clean. Like everything I eat is pretty much just like whole food ingredients and stuff like that. Took me an extremely long time to get there and figure out what foods work really well for me. But I do have a couple little things that I do. So like I have a coffee in the morning, but it's one of those little packaged mocha thingies or whatever. So I guess it's not really dirty, but I also started buying like this big bag of like Kit Kat minis. Um, and I just did this like this week is the first time that I did it actually, and it's been really helping. So I just toss it in the fridge. I take out 25 grams, measure it up, fits in my diet, makes it feel like it's not so restrictive. And then I actually started buying like these big ass strip loin steaks. And so I'll
Nice.
have one of those every day. So it's like 100 grams of protein per, because I have to eat like 325 grams of protein and then like 400 grams of carbs on my training days, and then 60 grams of fat. And that's I'm cutting right now too. So that's those are cutting calories, and so it's
Yeah.
quite a lot of food. But I
Yeah.
make sure that I get it from like good food sources. But I will eat like breads and pastas and things that are really, really calorie dense with a pretty low
Yeah.
volume. And I think that's been a huge, huge help. Um, because man, before I was doing the whole chicken and rice thing, and that was just
Oh,
not
brutal.
feasible at all. So
Yeah.
having steaks, having pasta, having like, different types of Greek yogurt or whatever, that's really, really helped get the protein and the carbs in and all that stuff. Or else like, man, yeah, I don't know how I did it
Yeah.
before.
Yeah. It's funny because often like bigger guys with more muscle and who are training hard and who are more active, they take a totally different view of calories compared to someone who doesn't have those attributes. So someone who's just a desk worker, maybe they've never really trained before. They're slightly high body fat percentage, like they're skinny fat. They probably look at like just the word calorie as an enemy. Just calories, you gotta get them down. You gotta always be cutting. You gotta volumize. You gotta use an anabolic diet, which is actually catabolic because you know for fat loss, right? It's for weight loss. You got to get in your fiber. You got to get in like
Is
the
that a
filling.
diet? The
Yeah,
anabolic
yeah,
diet?
yeah. That's the marketing side of
Yeah.
things.
Oh
It's
wow.
not really anabolic. It's sort of catabolic or
Yeah.
anti-catabolic, I guess. I don't know, but it's certainly not the way most athletes would eat because it's sort of like heading in the opposite direction
Yeah.
that most of them want.
No, I've just never heard that before, but yeah, that's pretty ironic. Anyways, go on. Sorry.
Yeah, so it's basically a lot of fillers and it fills you up and it has like fiber and for fat loss, I've heard a lot of good stuff about it, but it's just sort of a marketing term. And so, if you build up a good amount of muscle and you're fairly active and you're training hard, I mean, you can get away with like way more calories than you can at the start. People think that it's linear, but it's not. It's almost like exponential. Like the more you gain, the harder it is to gain. And, it's almost like walking up a steeper and steeper mountain. And then, when you want to lose, it's a lot easier because you can still eat quite a few calories. And it's just, it's this metabolic furnace that you basically built through muscle and then through, an active lifestyle, etc.
Yeah, it's funny actually too, because one of the things that I've noticed is the progress that I'm seeing now in my training and diet is like some of the best progress I've ever seen, which seems kind of counterintuitive because I've been training for quite a few years. And but I think a lot of that too is like you sort of reach this point where like, okay, sure, I obviously don't have newbie gains anymore, but then like dietary adherence, just the lifestyle variables lining up, like the level of kind of emotional maturity, your intelligence in terms of like, you know, how you're actually attacking your goals. Like there's all these things that just kind of start to build up, and man, it really goes a long way. Like I said, the progress I'm seeing right now is so much better than I was when I was a brand new athlete. And it's all
Yeah,
just because like it took so long to develop the skill of dieting, the skill of training intelligently, auto regulating, all this stuff. And
yeah,
yeah, and so
100% agree.
it's pretty interesting how that works. And so like it's almost like this second kind of burst of newbie gains when you start to get like your lifestyle sorted out.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah, I 100% agree. And, you know, people like to paint your gains in terms of strength or muscularity as this like diminishing return curve where it's like, oh, you make the majority of your progress year one. And then year two, like you get a little bit less. And then year three, you get a little bit less, right? Like that. I think we've all seen this like muscle growth per year chart. A strength growth per year chart is more individual, but like I haven't seen that at all.
I've
Like,
literally never seen that in the real world.
yeah, no, it doesn't happen because everyone fucks up their first year, or almost everyone fucks up their first year. And even if you didn't fuck up your first year, the things that you did your first year to get your newbie gains, it's going to plateau year 2 or 3 or 4, or at least it'll slow down significantly.
Yeah.
And then you're going to have to learn, right? Like training forces you to learn. And then, you know, I'm making better progress now than I did year 3, 4, even year 5, just because I'm eating more. The training is way more dialed in. It's way more structured. And everything is just a lot more on point than it was, you know, year 3 or 4, where I was making okay progress, but not as much as now, even though I'm later in my training career. And all those little things go a long way in terms of like the diet, the sleep, eating enough, recovery, programming is huge. Like just knowing how to structure things, exercise selection, the technique, everything, man. Like some people, I've seen some people claim to be at their genetic muscular potential. And then like there's so many things that they could do to get over that, right? Like some guys legit are, you know, if they've been training for 10, 12 years and they're doing things right, that's where I think, you know, maybe there's a case for that. But I see some guys, it's like year 5 and they think, okay, well, I guess this is it. Well, it is it for your level of knowledge and understanding and how to optimize the process. But like you could be up here if you really optimize things.
So that's actually kind of an interesting concept I've been sort of mulling around in my head, is the whole like genetic limit thing, right? Like I'm like, it makes sense that people have a genetic limit. And so it's not necessarily that I'm questioning that, but it's almost like how I perceive what that means is very different now than how I perceived it previously. Because
Yeah.
you look at someone like, or yeah, you do know who Dan Green is. You mentioned him earlier. So Dan Green is one of those guys that, again, sort of like throws a wrench in the cogs a little bit for me, because it's like I don't know how old he is. He's in his 40s, 40 something years old, I think, right? But he's still hitting like all-time PRs.
Yeah,
He's been training for like 25, 27 years. And it's like, you could maybe say, okay, yeah, that's the drugs. Maybe, but he's been doing insane amount of drugs for the last fucking how many years? So to me, that doesn't necessarily answer that. And he's by no means the only person who's been doing that. Like there's lots of people out there who are absolutely like bonkers strong and jacked, who just kind of keep getting more jacked. And so I wonder if it's, you know, and I think this is also part of the reason why people are like, oh, well, you know, you're in your 30s, whatever. I almost wonder, like, do you actually like start losing the strength and losing your potential in those ages? Or is it just that people enter a different phase of their life? And I'm more inclined to believe the latter, you know, and I'm talking about like elite level performance for things. Because especially recently, right? Like at least I have anyways, in a lot of different sports, I've been seeing a big shift in terms of the age limits of a lot of the athletes. Like you look at combat sports now. Before, you would never see an athlete who's 40 years old there. Now you see quite a few people who are in their 40s who are actually champions, you know, and that's maybe a little bit different because it's not purely athletic. It's very skill based. But I mean, I don't know. That's just kind of something I don't necessarily have like a concrete, this is what I believe yet. I'm just a little bit more skeptical that genetic limit is really as hardline as people think. I kind of think that as you get better, that limit goes up. I don't know about proportionally, but to some relative ratio, does that make sense?
Yeah, and it's hard to say like where you are on that curve or where the curve is,
Yeah,
right? Like
exactly. Right.
in theory, you'll get diminishing returns, but like that's only assuming everything is constant. And because we are adaptable humans and we can learn from the dumb shit we used to do, because everyone's done some dumb shit. Like I certainly have. I assume you've done like you've had mistakes in the past.
Very,
Like
very
everyone,
very
right? Like yeah, like Dan Green. I'm sure he did some stuff that looking back, he's probably like, yeah, maybe that wasn't as optimal or as effective, or you know, we're dudes. Like we do some dumb stuff. It's just like we try to minimize that more and more over time to get the result that we want. And ladies can do dumb stuff too. I'm not being sexist, right? It's just often they do less of it, in the gym. So you don't know where you are on that curve. You don't know where the curve is. You don't know how far along you are on the curve, because just because you've been lifting for 5 years doesn't mean you have year 5 of progress, right? Like you could be year 2 of progress. A lot of people have been lifting for 10, 20, 30 years, and they're kind of still beginners, right? Or
Yeah.
intermediate.
You
That
see these guys all the
intermediate
time
thing.
when you walk into commercial gyms.
Oh yeah, that's most people. Like they're
Yeah.
just they're infinitely plateaued because they never actually learn. They're just purgatorying themselves because they're not actually getting the knowledge and learning from their mistakes and actually growing mentally. Therefore, they don't grow physically, because at the end of the day, like, yeah, it's physical, but it's actually mental, right? Because you're not a robot where it's just everything happens. You actually have to go do it and then assess and analyze and learn from it and then see if you can do better. And so, I guess, yeah, there's a theoretical limit, but then like also maybe physiologically, you can perhaps, get new satellite cells, and like maybe hyperplasia is a thing. Excuse me. And, so physiologically, I don't think you're ever going to prove there's a limit. Plus, you look back at the guys in the 1930s and 40s who like were definitely natural. Some of them were like, they didn't have the best training. They didn't have a lot of these machines. Nutrition knowledge was like pretty rudimentary. They were some pretty damn jacked motherfuckers. And so I see some people, they're like, yo, the natural limit is 25 FFMI.
Yeah.
And people are like, no, we
that
saw
to
people.
Me, honestly, is bullshit.
Oh,
That's
yeah,
ridiculous.
like for sure. And I don't think everyone can get to 25 FFMI, but there are definitely some people who are going to be 26, 27, maybe even a little bit higher, just based on like better nutrition, machines, more consistency. I mean, people, they didn't really train a lot of muscle groups back then. Like having developed glutes was not a thing in the silver era. And the glutes are, I mean, that's like a few pounds of muscle right there. And so, that's what, maybe 0.2, 0.3 FFMI just from doing some hip thrust or something. So, it's interesting how people think there's a limit based on a situation that was very far from optimal. And we were just figuring out how to lift weights. And somehow their result was like the pinnacle of human achievement. And so, yeah, I think if people actually optimize things, they can do way more than they expect in a lot of cases.
Yeah, 100%. So like when I was natural, my FFMI or whatever was like 26 point something. And I've had no problem gaining muscle, but I have bad genetics for strength. Like I have to work and scrape and fight for every freaking pound that I put on the squat bar. But muscle, I've literally never trained for hypertrophy, and I'm like 275 right now, And I know some people might hate me for saying that, but like, so I know that I'm nowhere near. Like I know that for sure, for certain, that I can be 320 with like lean abs. You know, like I know that actually is the goal, but like that,
Yeah.
literally none of that even seems like a problem to me. It's just kind of an inevitability. But then it's like, will I ever squat 800 in sleeves? I don't know. You know,
Yeah.
like I don't know. Maybe, like probably I would say, but I don't know. Right?
Dead on.
It's yeah. Meanwhile, there's fucking like I got friends who like, you know, 3 years into their training, they're deadlifting like 8 something, and I'm just like, fuck you.
Oh, it's crazy. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm the same way where I've had clients who they ask me my lifts and I tell them, and then they're like, damn, I'm almost there, but like, I don't look the way you look. And, you know, they're repping 2 plates in the squat or something, and they have like these pretty skinny legs,
Yeah.
and like their working weights are not that far off what I use. And I'm
Yeah.
like noticeably way bigger. And, you
It's
know, there's
almost like
going
a
to be a
backhanded
correlation.
compliment.
You know, it's like, I guess a lot of it is genetics and then how you train and stuff. But yeah, there is going to be a variability. And I try to emphasize getting stronger because that is, you know, a very, very efficient way to gain size. But there is going to be some individual variability. And yeah, I'm definitely also on the side of like bigger rather than stronger. And so people hear my best lifts, like my best powerlifting total would be maybe 1,050, right? Like squat, bench, deadlift,
Mhm.
which is like, I mean, it's way it's way smaller than people would expect. Or another way to look at it is like I'm way bigger than people would expect based on my numbers.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, strength just is very, very slow for me. But it's always accompanied by size gains, right? Like if I put weight on my bench, you know, my chest grows. Same for squat and legs, same for, you know, deadlift and you know, hips and back. And so I still think that taking a strength focused approach, at least for reps and a variety of exercises, is still a good idea, even if you're predisposed to not be gifted for strength. You know, at least
Yeah.
that's how I look at things.
Yeah. Yeah. I kind of like the blended approach. Like I do a lot of concurrent training with my athletes anyways. Um, just because I find it's a pretty good approach. I mean, specifically for powerlifters, because one, a lot of the times they come to me kind of out of shape. So we need to improve their aerobic conditioning. A lot of the times we need to actually put some muscle mass on them. And so you can kind of kill 2 birds with one stone,
Yep.
while also tackling their strength. But so I like doing a lot of that stuff. But then at the same time, it's, yeah, there's just definitely differences in like response to strength. Like I have some people who, if I were to give them like triples and doubles for a long time, not even for a long time, but just for like kind of a reasonable amount of time, they just completely blow up. Whereas if I give them like somewhere between 5s and 8s, they get hella strong, and it always translates to a new 1RM, which is like whereas like for a lot of people, if they increase their 8RM, there is like not a lot of carryover to 1RM. Like the technique's just too different, you know. Um, but yeah, it just really depends, I guess. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I was watching some podcast or something. It was Sean Noriega, and he was saying how he was doing sets of 8, I think, might have been sets of 10 in the paused deadlift the week of his meet. So during his peak
That's
week, he was still
bananas.
doing, yeah, he was still doing sets of 8, which is like, but that's what he found. Like he had to keep in those reps all the way up, even through his peak. And his taper was like 10% reduction in volume or something, like something super, super small. Whereas other
Yeah.
people, they just need way more of a taper and way more of a reduction in volume. And I always found like sometimes people assume that I train a certain way based on how I look. So they'll assume like, okay, you're way bigger than you are strong. Therefore, you must do only like sets of 20 or sets of 15. That's
Mhm.
not the case at all, right? Like I've done lots of singles, doubles, triples. I just don't. It's just like whatever I do, strength is always slow, and then size is easy, right? It's like it doesn't matter if I use like the best program for strength, it just doesn't respond the same way. And, I can do sets of 8, 10, 12, doubles, triples, like speed reps. I haven't messed around with chains or bands, but I don't think that's going to be like the thing that explodes my lifts.
No. No,
I don't know. Probably not.
probably not.
But yeah, I've tried a bunch of different stuff, and some people just like, yeah, they just respond better in that way. But then, the grass is always greener on the other side. And so, you just sort of have to accept what you respond to and just sort of make the best of it, I guess.
I've been trying, like, kind of experimenting with a couple of my athletes with higher frequency approaches, which I don't exactly know how you train. I don't know if you do like kind of a regular upper lower split, or if you have like kind of a different paradigm set up. I know that I've been able to actually like reduce volume for quite a few of my athletes while increasing the amount of frequency that we're doing and getting better results with strength. And even for hypertrophy, the same thing, actually as well, just kind of by redistributing it and like having not necessarily full body days, but more blended days, almost like a power building type thing where you might like squat and bench one day, but for this, you'd probably be doing like, I don't know, like shoulders and back or something like that. Right. So you're kind of having a little bit more of a blend to get a higher frequency. And, but that seems to be pretty effective for like a lot of people. I don't know. It's just fun to kind of experiment with shit, I guess. But it's pretty crazy when you see like what works for this person, and then you have another person who's maybe like, I mean, maybe this is more relevant for me because like I have a couple athletes who are in the same like 56 kilo weight class, and they're all incredibly strong. But what works for each one of them is like so different. Like one, she needs to be pushed hard, but she can't handle high intensity for very long. The other one, I could get her to do literally one arms like every day, basically, and she gets super strong. Another one, I have her doing like 5 sets of triples on squat, and then like 4 sets of 5s on squats at like 80% the week of her, like actually not even just the week of, but like on Wednesday. And then Thursday, Friday, Saturday, she competes. So like 3 days later, she competes. She's doing like 4 sets of 5 at 80%, 3 by 5 on her deadlift, and then 5 by 3 at 85% on her bench. And she like, that's perfect for her. And she like fucking crushes it. So it's just like, it's so variable sometimes. But
I've been doing higher frequency for a while. Recently I've been doing basically full body every day, which is, I mean, it's tough. Like,
awful. Is it awful?
It's not something I'd recommend for beginners. And it's not really powerlifting focused, but basically what I found you have to do is for lower body, you have to have some of the sessions be like leg extensions and nothing else for quads. Like you can't squat with any kind of volume and intensity every day. Without just breaking or not progressing. But I found that it has worked very, very well for bench. I mean, my bench is not amazing, but like it has been progressing for me. Like any progression is like a really hell yeah moment where it's like, holy shit, I actually like made visible progress. And other people like, oh, I only put 20 pounds on my bench this month. Like, I guess I'm plateaued because last month was 40 pounds. I'm like, oh, God damn it. Like, that's not a plateau, motherfucker. Yeah. But for me, like, I found higher frequency.
So it's turkesterone gains.
Yeah. I've actually been planning a video. I don't know. Like, I'm not big into supplements generally, but, it's mostly the training from what I found. And just, again, experimenting with what works for you. And the magnitude of the progression is, it's going to be a lot genetics, but like still, you should still find what works best for you. And that's what I've found works best for my bench. Eric Helms, he said that like, he went from benching twice a week to like 4 times per week and then 5 and 6 or something. And it worked really, really well because he was plateaued before. And yeah, I found that, my shoulders can take it, and, sometimes it's a little tougher to warm up, but once you're warmed up, like, it's almost like recovery is not much of an issue, at least for me. Whereas like if I tried high frequency deadlifting, it just eats you up. It's just like, it's a totally different thing, at least for me.
Yeah.
And so the good thing about full body is that it teaches you like what movements just need more recovery time, and then also what muscle groups and what areas you can hit harder or not as hard. Like I could work back every day for like 3, 4, 5, 6 sets to failure, like actual failure, and it just doesn't, like I don't even get sore. They're all to true failure, and like it's just a completely different thing compared to like hamstrings or lower back. When I say row, I mean like chest supported and machine stuff. Like the barbell row is kind of a different animal.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense. Awesome, man. Well, I feel like we covered quite a bit of stuff. Was there anything that maybe you wanted to leave the listeners with? Again, I guess this is a little bit more focused towards people who are kind of still in that novice phase for bodybuilding, kind of trying to find what works for them.
Yeah, just keep experimenting, stay consistent. I know those sort of seem like two opposite things. But keep a training log. I know this is some really basic stuff that I'm sure a lot of your listeners are sort of rolling their eyes at. But even if you're more advanced, there are almost certainly some stones left to turn over, some things to try. So, keep finding new sources of information, and don't get dogmatic. That's something that's super easy to do in the fitness industry. Like you find one method and that's your method. And like the only thing you should do is this. And that's usually something that's going to actually keep you back and hold back your progress. Because there might be something even in some random like bodybuilding accessory that could actually transfer over to the power lifts, or vice versa. Like you learn something from a power lifter that transfers over to bodybuilding. And I think especially the more advanced you get, the more important it is to learn, right? Like some people, the more advanced they get, the less they learn because they feel like they've learned so much already and they don't need to learn anymore. I look at it as the opposite way, right? Like you're going to hit these diminishing returns like we talked about. And so the only way over those diminishing returns is to learn more and to keep, learning new stuff and then applying it and seeing if it works, in order to sort of fight against that diminishing returns curve, to try to sort of unflatten it so you can keep making progress.
Oh, that makes sense. Awesome, man. So where can people find you?
Let's see. It's just my name, Geoffrey Verity Schofield, Geoffrey Verity, etc. It should autocomplete if you have internet at the moment. So it's on Quora, Instagram, and then YouTube as well. And so those are the main platforms that I'm on. No TikTok yet or ever because I don't really like that platform. But other ones are fair game. And then my website is verityfit, VERITYFIT.com, which is basically just there to sell my book, which is $20, 200 pages, lots of useful information to be found there.
Awesome, man. So all that stuff's going to be linked up in the show notes, guys. Make sure you go check them out. Give them a follow. Man, thanks so much for jumping on. It was great chatting.
Yeah, man. Had a good time.